News Talk on Samar News, your go-to podcast for the latest headlines and in-depth discussions. Join us as we unravel the stories that matter most, bringing you insightful commentary and expert analysis. Tune in for thought-provoking conversations that spark dialogue and inspire action. Stay connected with the news that shapes our world, only on News Talk on Samar News.
Okay, so for anyone out there trying to wrap their heads around, global justice, it can feel pretty abstract, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is something else entirely. A former head of state actually appearing before the International Criminal Court. It's like watching this long and complicated chase for accountability finally
Crystallizing,
Crystallizing, exactly.
It's a huge moment.
It is. So that's what we're diving into today. All the ins and outs of Rodrigo Duterte's first hearing at the ICC.
Yeah, should be fascinating.
It should be, and we really want to uncover what this actually tells us about, how far the ICC can reach and the pushback that it faces along the way.
For sure. I mean, we're talking about some serious power dynamics at play here.
Exactly. So we've been poring over, all those detailed reports of what went down in the courtroom.
Lots to unpack there.
Oh, yeah, tons. So we're bringing you the really key insights, the stuff you need to know.
The good stuff.
The good stuff, exactly. So our mission today is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, what are we looking at?
We want to understand what actually happened during this first appearance, but even more than that, what it all means.
Yeah, the implications are massive.
They are, and just to set the scene for you, this wasn't like your typical courtroom drama,
Right.
Duterte actually appeared virtually. He was in front of 3 female judges.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, from pretrial chamber.
It's interesting. So this is already breaking new ground in a way.
It is. And here's another thing to really consider. Duterte is the first former Asian head of state to actually be arrested by the ICC.
Wow, that's significant, yeah.
It is. It really underscores, how these international legal systems could actually reach even the highest levels of power.
Potentially,
right?
It's a big test for the ICC.
It is. So let's get down to brass tacks here.
Yeah.
The formal start of this whole process.
Yeah, let's dive in.
Okay, so the session began with Judge Maddock. She welcomed everyone and gave those standard reminders about recording.
The formalities.
Right, necessary though.
Oh, absolutely.
Then they get into the official name of the case. It's a bit dry, but it's important. The situation in the Republic of the Philippines case.
Right.
The prosecutor versus Mr. Rodrigo Duterte, case number ICC 01210125.
It's like the legal version of a drum roll.
It kind of is, it's very official.
Sets the tone.
It does.
Yeah.
So what do you think for our listeners here, why all this formality right from the get-go?
Well, I think it's a few things. First, it's about legitimacy, right? Ensuring due process, making sure everything is by the book.
Yeah.
But it can feel a bit distant. You're right.
Yeah.
But think of it this way. It's like the scaffolding.
Oh, okay.
The necessary structure to build a fair examination of the facts.
I like that, yeah.
So then after that, we had the introduction of the prosecution team.
Right.
Led by Karim Khan himself, the prosecutor.
Right.
He had his deputies with him, trial lawyers, the case manager.
Oh, wow. So the whole team.
Yeah, they're taking this very seriously.
I see.
Shows you the weight they're putting behind this case.
And on Duterte's side, we had his lawyer, Salvador Medialdea.
Right.
He was actually in the courtroom.
Oh, so physically present.
Yeah, even though Duterte himself was appearing through video link.
Interesting.
Yeah, the court actually mentioned this.
They did.
Yeah, they said it was because of the, long journey and the time difference.
Oh, that makes sense.
But it makes you wonder, why would they even address that?
That's a good point.
Is it just being polite, or are they trying to head off potential arguments from the defense,
I think it's probably a mix, to be honest. Acknowledging the practical challenges shows that they're aware of the situation, right? Mm-hmm. But then, given what the defense said later, it could also be them laying the groundwork.
Okay.
To show they were trying to be accommodating from the beginning.
Right.
Smart move.
It is. So then we get to the point where they confirm Duterte's identity.
Right.
He gave his full name, Rodrigo Roa Duterte.
Okay.
And when they asked for his date of birth, there was a little bit of a stumble. His lawyer actually had to ask for the question to be repeated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Eventually, he confirmed March 28th, 1945, born in Leyte, Philippines.
Gotcha.
It's easy to lose sight of the person when you're dealing with all this legal stuff,
Yeah, it's easy to get bogged down in the procedure.
It is. But that little moment, it reminds you that there's an actual human being at the center of this massive international case.
It humanizes it.
It does. Do you think that little hiccup means anything?
You know, it's interesting because even in these very formal settings,
Right.
those little human moments can pop up.
Yeah.
And even though it seemed minor,
Yeah.
the defense could potentially use that later,
Oh.
to argue that maybe Duterte wasn't fully understanding things.
Oh, interesting.
Or that he wasn't completely alert.
Wow.
These are the little details that lawyers love to grab onto.
They do. Okay, so something else that's important here. The presiding judge confirmed that the whole hearing would be in English for Duterte.
Good.
And this was based on conversations they had at the detention center the day before.
Right.
Apparently, he didn't need an interpreter.
So they figured English was fine.
Yeah, and that's important for our listeners because it means they weren't expecting communication to be a big issue.
At least from the court's perspective.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But as we'll see, the defense had a very different take on that.
Oh, that's interesting.
It is. All right, so let's move on to what this initial appearance actually was.
Yeah.
And maybe more importantly, what it wasn't.
Right.
They made it very clear this was not the start of the trial.
Okay.
It wasn't a hearing to decide if the charges against him were true or not.
Right.
The prosecution didn't present any evidence, and no one even talked about whether he was guilty or innocent.
So this was purely procedural.
Exactly, just a preliminary step. It's
Yeah.
really important for people to understand that.
Yeah, it's easy to get confused.
It is.
This initial appearance is mostly administrative,
Right.
just to make sure the accused knows the charges and their rights.
Yeah.
Not about actually judging the accusations yet.
Right. Okay, so then the judge laid out the three main reasons for this hearing.
Okay.
And these aren't just made-up rules. You know, they're based on the Rome Statute.
The ICC's founding document.
Exactly. It sets out all the court's powers and procedures.
And it has its own set of rules, too, right?
Right. The rules of procedure and evidence.
All to ensure fairness.
Yeah. So the three main goals were,
Lay them on us.
number one, to make sure Duterte was formally told what the charges against him were.
Okay.
Number two, to make absolutely sure he understood his rights under the Rome Statute.
Right.
And number three, to set a date for the next big hearing, the confirmation of charges hearing.
Gotcha.
So they also mentioned that the defense had filed 2 motions before the hearing,
Interesting.
but they said those wouldn't be addressed at this stage.
Oh, because of the limited scope?
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like they're telling the defense, we hear you, but this isn't the time for those arguments.
Okay.
Sets the stage for some legal battles down the road for sure.
For sure. Okay, so then what?
Well, then we get to the actual reading of the charges.
Okay, the main event.
Kind of, right? So the court officer...
Acting as the voice of the prosecution.
Right. Read out all the accusations in English.
Okay.
There were 2 sets of charges.
2 sets.
Yeah, the first one had to do with when Duterte was the mayor of Davao City.
Yeah.
That was between 2011 and 2016.
Right.
He's accused of the murder of at least 19 people.
19 people.
Yeah, they were alleged to be drug pushers or thieves.
Right.
And these killings were allegedly done by the Davao Death Squad.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they're saying he was an indirect co-perpetrator in all of this.
That's heavy stuff.
It is, and the second set of charges covers his time as president
Okay.
from 2016 to 2019.
Okay.
In this one, he's accused of murdering at least 24 people all across the Philippines.
Wow.
Yeah, and these alleged victims were supposedly criminals, drug pushers, thieves, or users.
Right.
And the killings were allegedly carried out by or under the supervision of Philippine law enforcement.
And sometimes with civilians involved too, right?
Exactly. So
That's a lot of accusations.
it is. And the judge made sure to point out that these charges match up perfectly with what was in the arrest warrant that Duterte already received.
Right. So no surprises there.
Exactly.
Right.
So in terms of the accusations themselves, this wasn't anything new.
Gotcha. But
Yeah.
still, I mean, hearing it read out loud in that setting
Oh, yeah.
must have been intense.
Absolutely. Okay, so after they read the charges, the judge went on to explain all of Duterte's rights as someone being accused at the ICC.
Right. Essential part of the process.
It is. So she outlined a bunch of fundamental rights.
Okay. Like what?
Well, first, he has the right to a competent interpreter and translation of documents if he needs it.
Makes sense.
And he has the right to enough time and resources to prepare his defense
Okay.
and to talk to his lawyer privately, you know.
Right. Confidential communication.
Yeah, crucially, she reminded him that he can stay silent.
Ah, the right to remain silent.
Exactly. He doesn't have to testify against himself or admit to anything.
Pretty basic legal principles.
Right. wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The foundation of any fair system.
Yeah, and the fact that the court is emphasizing them here
Right.
really shows their commitment to due process.
Especially in a case this big and this political.
Yeah, it sets a clear standard for how things should go.
Absolutely.
Okay, so other important rights that were mentioned for our listeners.
Yeah.
Duterte can make statements in his defense without having to swear an oath.
Okay.
And the prosecutor has to give him any evidence that could help prove his innocence.
That's huge.
It is. Or any evidence that could weaken the prosecution's case.
Right.
And anything that could damage the credibility of the prosecution itself.
It has to be completely transparent.
Yeah. And then there are his rights at the confirmation of charges hearing.
Right.
He can officially challenge the charges,
Okay.
argue against the evidence the prosecution presents, and present his own evidence.
It's his chance to fight back.
Exactly. And the judge made it clear if the charges aren't confirmed at that hearing, there won't even be a trial.
Okay, that's important.
It is. And he can also apply for release while waiting for the trial.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a standard right at the ICC.
Okay.
So his defense team might try to use that as things move forward.
Could be a strategic move.
It could be. And lastly, the judge emphasized that Duterte has the right to be told everything about the charges in a language he understands completely.
Right. That's essential.
It is. So, after all that, the judge turned to Duterte's lawyer, Salvador Medialdea,
Okay.
and asked him straight up if he understood all these rights.
And what did he say?
Well, that's where things got a little dramatic.
Oh.
Medialdea asked the court if he could present what he called a manifestation.
A manifestation.
Yeah, about how Duterte ended up at the ICC.
Oh, okay.
And that's where the defense really started to challenge the whole process.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Medialdea, he came out swinging.
Oh, really?
He said that bringing Duterte to The Hague was basically an extrajudicial rendition.
Wow.
Or even a kidnapping.
He went there.
He said the whole thing was political core settling. Meaning there were ulterior motives behind the prosecution.
Wow.
Yeah. He even suggested that there's this unlikely alliance between the current Philippine president and the ICC.
So he's basically saying this is all a setup.
Pretty much what stands out to you about all this?
Well, it's a direct attack on the ICC's legitimacy.
Right.
They're trying to paint a very different picture.
Yeah.
By using terms like extrajudicial rendition and kidnapping,
Uh-huh.
they want to make Duterte look like the victim.
A victim of political game.
Exactly. Not someone who's being held accountable.
And that bit about an unlikely alliance.
Yeah, that throws in a whole other layer of intrigue.
It does. It does. Like, it's suddenly not just about the law anymore.
Right. It's about politics.
Yeah.
That's a powerful move.
It is. And he kept going.
He didn't stop there.
No, he brought up the ICC's private jet that was used to bring Duterte over.
Okay.
And he questioned, like, how that was all coordinated and the fact that it stopped in the United Arab Emirates.
Which isn't a member of the ICC.
Right. He said that raised serious questions about whether the whole transfer was even legal.
That's a good point.
Right.
Bringing in a non-member state does complicate things legally.
Yeah.
The defense could argue that that messes with the whole process.
Right. So then Medialdea brings up Duterte's health.
Go away.
He described him as elderly with debilitating medical issues.
Oh, wow.
He said he's hard of hearing, has bad eyesight,
Okay.
and that he was hospitalized as soon as he got to The Hague.
So they're saying he's not in good shape.
Basically, yeah. And that makes you wonder if he's even well enough to handle all this, you know?
It's a fair question.
Right.
They're trying to show that he might not be able to fully understand the charges.
Right.
Or give instructions to his lawyers effectively.
Yeah, or even just participate in the process.
It's a common tactic.
Yeah.
To highlight the accused's vulnerabilities.
Okay, and then Medialdea claimed that the defense team hadn't had much access to their client at all.
Oh, that's not good.
He said he'd only met with Duterte that morning for less than an hour.
Wow.
And that they hadn't even been given a copy of the arrest warrant.
Really?
Yeah, so he said because of that, they couldn't even explain to Duterte why the prosecution wanted the warrant.
Oh, that's bad.
If that's true, it could really hurt their ability to prepare a defense.
Absolutely. I mean, how can you defend someone if you can't talk to them properly?
Right.
That's a serious due process issue.
Yeah, and maybe the biggest thing, Medialdea said that because of all these issues, Duterte wasn't even able to confirm to the court that he'd been told what he was being accused of.
Wow.
Yeah, and he even suggested that there was a secret reason why he couldn't confirm.
Oh, man, that's a bombshell.
It is so. After all, that he asked the court again to postpone anything important until they had more time to meet with Duterte and get ready.
So they're trying to slow things down.
Yeah, it was a pretty clear attempt to delay the whole process.
It's a bold strategy.
It is. So how did the judge respond to all of this?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Well, first she addressed the health concerns.
Okay.
Judge Motok said the court had already done things to check on Duterte's health.
Okay.
She mentioned that the court's doctor saw him when he arrived and said that he was fully mentally aware and fit.
Interesting.
And she said they had done more medical checks and tests since then.
So they're saying he's fine?
Pretty much. It seems like they're trying to counter the defense's claims.
Yeah, they're basically saying, we checked he's healthy enough.
Right. And they even mentioned that the doctor said he could participate through video link with written permission.
Oh, wow. So they're really trying to make sure he can be involved.
They are. And she also directly addressed the claims that Duterte hadn't been told about the charges and his rights.
Right. That was a big point of contention.
It was Judge Motok mentioned a report from the court's registry saying that Duterte had been officially told about his rights, including the relevant parts of the Rome Statute.
Okay.
And that he knew about the charges and the arrest warrant, and that it was all in English.
So they're relying on their records to say he was informed.
Right. And that directly contradicts what the defense was saying.
That's a big disagreement.
It is. And then the judge reiterated that this initial hearing was very specific and limited in scope.
Right.
She said again that it was mainly about telling the suspect what they were accused of and what their rights were.
Okay.
And she said there would be plenty of chances later to bring up other stuff.
Like what?
Like whether the arrest warrant was valid, the details of the crimes, the court's jurisdiction over the case, and how Duterte was arrested and transferred.
Right. So she's basically saying save it for later.
Exactly. It's all about following the ICC's rules and keeping things moving.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So what about that request to postpone the important parts of the hearing?
Yeah, what happened with that?
Judge Modak shut it down.
Oh, wow.
She said again that the initial appearance is supposed to be simple.
Okay.
And that it doesn't need a lot of preparation.
Right.
And she also mentioned that the court had already made 2 decisions about this that the defense knew about.
So they're not backing down?
Nope. They're making it clear that they want to move forward.
Okay.
So despite all that back and forth, the court moved on to the next step.
Which is?
Setting a date for the confirmation of charges hearing.
Okay. And when is that?
September 23rd, 2025.
Wow. That's a ways off.
Yeah, it is. But that's a date for our listeners to keep in mind.
A date to mark on the calendar.
Definitely.
But it's not set in stone, right?
You're right.
Yeah.
The judge did say that the pretrial chamber can postpone it.
Okay.
Either if something unexpected happens or if the prosecution or the defense have a good reason to delay.
So it's tentative.
Yeah, it's a target, but it could change.
Okay.
Okay, so lastly, the judge talked about what happens next.
Right. What's the next step?
Well, they're going to schedule status conferences.
Okay.
That's under Rule 121, subsection 2B of the Rules of Procedure and Evidence.
A mouthful.
It is basically those conferences are for the prosecution and the defense to share information.
Okay.
And for the court to manage how the case moves forward.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and there will be decisions coming out about how and when the prosecution has to disclose evidence to the defense.
Okay, that's crucial.
It is those status conferences are really important to make sure both sides have what they need to prepare.
Right.
And to keep things organized and efficient.
Right, and the decisions on evidence disclosure?
Yeah.
Those are going to determine what information the defense gets to build their case.
Exactly. And the chamber specifically ordered the prosecutor to start sharing the evidence that led to the arrest warrant right away.
Oh, wow.
They have just 7 days from the hearing to do it.
So they're not wasting any time?
Nope. The court clearly wants the defense to have that information as soon as possible.
Okay.
And finally, the court said that they would be making a decision about victims participating in the proceedings.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is important for our listeners because it shows that this case isn't just about the accused and the prosecution.
Right. The victims have a role to play, too.
Exactly. Victim participation is a core part of what the ICC does.
Yeah, it gives the people who were harmed a voice.
Right.
And a chance to maybe get some kind of justice.
Exactly. And
Yep.
the court will decide how that's going to work in this specific case.
Makes sense.
So to sum it all up for you, Rodrigo Duterte has appeared before the International Criminal Court.
Virtually, at least.
Right. He's facing serious charges. They read them out loud.
And they explained his rights very carefully.
Yeah. And his defense team raised some really strong objections.
Oh, yeah. About the whole process?
About how he got there and if he's even able to participate.
Right, right.
And they set a date for the next big step, the confirmation of charges hearing.
September of next year.
Right.
Yeah. This is a historic moment, really.
It is.
I mean, this is the first time a former Asian head of state has been in front of the ICC.
It really is.
It has huge implications for trying to hold powerful people accountable.
It does, and given everything the defense said.
Right, about how Duterte was brought to The Hague.
Yeah, and calling it an extrajudicial rendition and a kidnapping.
Yeah, right.
And their arguments about his health and their limited access to him.
What do you think all of that tells us about actually achieving international justice? You know?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, the defense is raising some fundamental issues.
About?
State sovereignty.
Yeah.
Due process, the potential for political interference in these international legal proceedings.
It's complex.
It's this tension between the ICC trying to assert its authority over these really serious crimes and the pushback they're getting.
Right, right.
Definitely a lot to think about.
It is so much food for thought.
Yeah.
So we really encourage you all to keep following this case as it unfolds.
It's a landmark case.
Absolutely. Keep in mind all the complexities and all the big questions it raises about how far international justice can actually reach and the challenges it faces in our world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
News Talk on Samar News, your go-to podcast for the latest headlines and in-depth discussions. Join us as we unravel the stories that matter most, bringing you insightful commentary and expert analysis. Tune in for thought-provoking conversations that spark dialogue and inspire action. Stay connected with the news that shapes our world, only on News Talk on Samar News.